So I asked all of you to vote on your most loved cards of 2022, and these are the top 10. Well, these three aren't. These are actually the honorable mentions, number 11, 12, and 13. These are three amazing late game cards that feature a little disruption and chaos and control. Three themes I think are going to show up time and time again in this video. But for the actual top 10, I'm going to mix things up a little this time, and I'm going to start with number 1 because I think it's the most interesting to talk about. And the number 1 most loved card in Hearthstone in 2022 was Prince Renathal. And I wanted to start with Renathal here, despite this being number 1, because this has been such a focus of discussion in the Hearthstone community lately. And I just wanted to address that right off the bat so we can all feel good having chatted about Renathal. And boy, this was a pretty decisive number 1 at that. Usually when it comes to these most loved lists, people have their own little pocket favorite card for whatever reason, and it's a really long list, and there's not too many standout things. But Renathal actually took a huge portion of the vote, probably because so many people right now are missing Prince Renathal after his very recent nerf down to 35 health instead of 40. And, you know, the same thing was said over and over again here for Renathal. I just picked a few quotes, but they all were basically the same kind of idea. Someone said, it just felt like it gave you so many options and it slowed down the game to a point where a lot of decks felt viable. I loved more control tools and being able to have time to play my strongest cards. Plus, I hate aggro. And one person just wrote control, 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 all the way until the form stopped taking additional words. So they really got their point across there. Certainly wanted to include that one. And, you know, yeah, I feel the same way. We've seen a lot of prominent community members coming to the defense of Renathal, expressing how much they loved Renathal's change of pace in Hearthstone. It felt like it slowed the game down, gave you a couple extra turns to do your cool thing that you're looking to do. And of course, Renathal proved to be a really powerful card in Hearthstone as well, with showing up in a bunch of decks. We saw a lot of successful Renathal builds. It kind of went in tandem with things like Denathrius, just adding a bunch of minions to your deck and having that big late game finisher for a deck that can take a little bit longer, but other builds as well were successful with Renathal. And since the nerf to Renathal, we have certainly seen the card's win rate fall off pretty hard. I wanted to pull up some data here of Renathal on HS Replay to see the effect of the changes to Renathal. So pardon me how bright this is, I know, but we can see here's the Renathal win rate. And, you know, after the nerf, we saw Renathal move from green to red. His win rate went negative, might be stabilizing a little better on very recent data. And also, of course, his player, it was over 50% for a while and has now plummeted as of yesterday to 15%, maybe stabilizing a little bit under 20, somewhere around there as the data comes in on that last day. So, you know, falling 30% in popularity, falling into negative win rates has had clearly a really big impact. This 5 health, more or less, hamstrung Renathal in a lot of ways. It's very hard for decks now to make this one work. Now, interestingly though, 20% of people are still choosing to run Renathal, even though their win rate's suffering, which I thought was a really neat point to showcase that people love the card so much. They love this idea of Renathal that even if it's not good for their win rate, they're still willing to do it because they like the idea of that extra health. And I'm honestly pretty shocked Blizzard was willing to nerf a card that so many people seem to love. And again, it shows up here in this vote that so many people love Renathal. Now, I'm not unaware of the fact that there are different parts of the Hearthstone player base. Some people love long, grindy, slower games that Renathal might encourage. Some people want really fast games and they want to be able to play on the go and on their phone. And Renathal made games take too long, perhaps sometimes, and could shut out certain really fast strategies. So there was a bit of a divide there, and perhaps Blizzard is trying to support both portions of those player base, give Renathal players some time, give non-Renathal players some moments as well by nerfing Renathal. Otherwise, you know, it's another year of Renathal action. I do understand that, and perhaps even, you know, stuff like this survey is very biased towards our sampling, because I'm sampling people who are watching the game on YouTube, who watch me because I like grindier, slower more, hilarious and fun sorts of things. I don't like hyper efficient aggro decks. So certainly my audience self-selects into people who like slower things. So, this is not necessarily representative of the entire Hearthstone player base, but it is certainly representative of a lot of the Hearthstone player base nonetheless. And I know how many people are sad that Renathal got nerfed. A lot of people have reported quitting the game. They're so frustrated they want Renathal back. And a lot of people are expressing dissatisfaction with the meta in the post-Renathal era. It feels like we have a lot more damage from hand and these sort of race decks that are just trying to race you down. And the game feels more about these racing win conditions as opposed to maybe a little bit more of that like grindy style that Renathal encouraged, which I liked personally so much. So what does all that mean? I don't know, man. People liked Renathal. They're sad Renathal's gone. A lot of you loved Renathal, and I'm right there with you. I'm also sad. This is one of my favorite cards ever in Hearthstone, not just in 2022. I really liked the influence this had on the game. I felt like I was having a good time in the Renathal world. So I guess, share more thoughts about Renathal. Some of you hate it, some of you love it. I'm curious to hear all those takes in the comments below. Just be nice to each other, and remember, control, 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 control. So we'll move on to number 2. I guess we'll just keep going in this order. The number 2 most loved card in 2022 was Sire Denathrius, who was also, by the way, the number 1 most hated card of 2022. So very divisive card, quite clearly. A lot of people loved it. A lot of people hated it. I will say that it got more hate votes than love votes for this particular audience. But still, Denathrius had his fans, certainly. This comment reads, from a new player's perspective, it was amazing to see such a cool, impactful card given for free. It felt badass and cool each time I played it. And yeah, I think that is one of the great things about some of these cards. They were free and available to everybody, so that really does make them feel more like an everyman sort of card. It would be a lot worse if these big, awesome win conditions that were in so many decks and so popular were a lot harder to get. I know that goes in hand a little bit. Accessibility leads to popularity, but not all that much, especially when we filter to the top of the meta. Most people craft good cards and kind of get around that a little bit, but it's still nice that that these free cards had an impact. Somebody else wrote, I know everyone hates him, but it's extremely satisfying to see the number tick up. You feel like a cartoon villain giving an evil monologue to the hero, powerless to stop your inevitable victory. And I do understand those emotions. I've had those same experiences where it feels so good to play the Denathrius, especially I think if it's like a stabilizing Denathrius, if it's not about killing the opponent, but it's like, yes, I just healed for 25 and cleared your board. I loved those moments. I almost wish we could have gotten the original Denathrius infuse pattern, but where it didn't go face, where it just cleared boards and healed you for like this Super Reno style effect. Maybe even if it was like a little cheaper or something, that would have been a really cool version of Denathrius for some big greedy control player like me. But him ending games over and over and over again, every game ending the exact same way, that certainly got very tiresome. And it did feel like a lot of games just devolved into who gets the first big Denathrius or who steals the first big Denathrius perhaps. And I don't think that was very good for the game overall. So I do understand that emotional side of enjoying Denathrius. I get it, but ultimately probably a good thing that his impact has been lessened, although perhaps some more creative changes to him could have left him fun for players like me. So the number 3 card here, this was absolutely out of left field. I never would have dreamed this card made the list. I forgot about this card really, more or less. This is Spitelash Siren, the number 3 most loved card of 2022. And first I thought, man, did like one guy submit like 10 surveys to this one card? I don't think so. I looked at the data, it looked legit. A lot of you have such fond memories of Spitelash Siren that it's showing up this often in the data. I'm sure some of you will need a refresher on this card. This was played in the Siren Mage decks where you'd have alternating spam between Nagas and spells, and then you'd have these pseudo infinite mana turns where you'd pop off and do crazy things. Spitelash Siren actually got nerfed, if you'll recall, to 5 mana. That deck kind of went away between that and future expansions. But some thoughts here about Spitelash Siren from you guys. You wrote, super fun type of card that creates really involved APM turns that are incredibly engaging to play with. This card single-handedly created one of the most fun decks to play this year. Naga Mage was a blast to play, a high skill floor and even higher skill ceiling. I do agree with the nerf, but man, for the first time in years, I had genuine fun playing the game. So this clearly scratched an itch for people who were looking for that sort of high octane, high APM action in Hearthstone. We don't get that too often, and it does happen. It's usually in Rogue, I feel like. So in a different class and with a little bit of a different style. And I will say the Siren definitely added another layer of skill to that entire equation. Often with Rogue, it was just about playing as many cards as you can, and that's still the case often in Rogue. Like, you still need to get things going in the right order often, but it's just about spamming cards. And sometimes it doesn't have to be perfect, right? It doesn't have to be perfectly precise to still have some big pop-off turns. But with this, you had that extra thing to keep in mind. It's like, I have to also alternate. It's not just about playing the cards and targeting the right thing and using them on the right places and discovering the right options. It's also about, I have to make sure I'm constantly alternating as well. So that extra layer of skill added in probably made this card really satisfying to play. I honestly never really played Siren Mage. It's not my style of deck. I don't love these kind of things, but it's pretty neat that this was so engaging to people that it's been locked in for the better part of a year. This card hasn't really been something that's shown up in a long time, but people are still thinking about it, still remembering this deck. I think that's actually really cool that a card had that big of an impact. Personally, I'm glad it got nerfed. I thought the mana cheat was a little excessive. Looking back, is it as bad as some of the stuff we have nowadays? I don't think so. It wasn't always game ending either. Sometimes it could find some crazy burst turns, but often it was just about setting up big boards. I'd almost take Spite Lash Siren over some of the things we have right now. So I kind of get the fondness and the nostalgia, if you will, for this card. I was surprised, but it's cool to see. So moving over to the number 4 spot, this one absolutely did not surprise me. It's Tess Greymane. And despite being a card that's like 4+ years old at this stage, I think, Tess Greymane's still making the list, which I love. Her introduction back into the core set has really created some fun opportunities for Tess Greymane. We've had various Thief Rogue style builds succeeding, some without Tess, but Tess is also getting played in actual competitive meta decks, which is so cool to see. I love it. I think this is one of the best all-time cards in Hearthstone. It's this perfect mix of like really fun, really chaotic gameplay, but still balanced. It rarely feels like it's like stealing games out from under you. So I really just one of my all-time favorite cards, and clearly for you all as well. People wrote super fun and powerful build around for Thief Rogue that also felt fair in its randomness. Watching other class chaos unfold for ridiculous game states is just too fun, and Thief Rouge is the only fun deck I had in the last 3 years. Well, that's kind of sad to read, but I understand why Thief Rogue was so much fun. It's really cool to see old cards like this brought back and be so great for the game. They just feel impactful, they feel interesting, and Tess didn't really get that many great decks or competitive decks in her era, so seeing it now is a real delight, and happy to see Tess recognized here. Moving on, we've got our first Death Knight card at the number 5 spot, Alexandros Mograine, the whacker, if you will. Somebody here wrote, "I will slowly whack you to death." That's certainly how I hope to die. Somebody else here wrote, "I've always wanted a card exactly like this, and while I can understand those who say it isn't a fun mechanic to have a ticking clock in the game, I find it delightfully entertaining to have these permanent bonuses aiding my overall game plan." And I have to say, I love having a ticking clock on the game like this. I think this is the right kind of win condition I want to see in Hearthstone. Right now, we have all these win conditions where you have a ticking clock, but the clock is 1 turn. You're just dead, and you don't see the clock. The clock is hidden, obscured from your view. Denathrius was like that. You couldn't really see what Denathrius's count was at. You could maybe kind of put it together, but you don't know when they got it in hand exactly half the time. So it was an obscured clock. We have all these OTKs where you have a clock, but it's 1 turn. I love the notion that you can see the clock with Mograine. You know how much damage. You might be able to calculate and say, okay, man, they don't have any other burst in their deck, so I've got 6 turns to figure out a way to win this game before I'm dead, or I have to find some healing. Do they have weapons to change the clock? Oh my god. And all these interesting little lines start to happen. We have to calculate out how exactly Mograine's going to make an impact. And it's a big sacrifice for the opponent to play this. Most of the time, they don't really feel like they love passing, just playing a 7/7 on turn 7, and it might take them 5, 6, 7 turns for a card like this to pay off. So it comes with risk and sacrifice as a win condition, where a lot of the win conditions now feels like, they just lined up perfectly. They didn't really have to sacrifice much. They played their game plan how they wanted, just moving towards their OTK very easily. So for me, I wish we had more win conditions like this in Hearthstone. Slower, grindier, higher visibility for me, Mograin's like a perfect win condition sort of card in Hearthstone. I love this one. Mograin is also probably like top 2 for me this year, maybe number 1 even. I don't know. Maybe Mograin's my number 1 loved card of 2022. I think this is absolutely delightful for a design. I don't mind the ticking clock at all. I like that hanging over your head. I'm so happy to see that so many people recognize Mograin here to make a top 5 spot. So moving on to number 6, it's the Countess. And yeah, one of the comments here just wrote hot. I disagree. I'm not into the dominatrix grandmas, but you do you. If that's why you like a card, that's a valid reason to enjoy a card. I'm not here to judge. I like this first comment a little more for me. It says it's often pretty fun to just pull a win out of nowhere, and indeed that can be pretty fun. It's nice to just see what unfolds and try to put together a game plan off of these Countess cards, sometimes doing something absolutely silly and absurd and seemingly unfair, but other times, just trying to piece together a couple solid cards and seeing what you can do with it, and sometimes just completely whiffing too. It's nice that you have that range a little bit. It adds some unpredictability here. But as far as the balance is concerned of the Countess, I think this card strikes a really good balance spot after it got buffed. Remember, the invitations actually used to be 3 mana, but again, kind of like Mograin, you're making this big commitment to play the Countess. It's probably not a play you're super excited about, just kind of sitting there helplessly, letting your opponent hit you in the face if you want. You're sacrificing now for this payoff later with the Countess. And you're also building your deck to encourage it too, because remember, she is a pure paladin sort of card. So there are these 2 kind of downsides, conditionalities to the Countess. I'm skipping this turn 7, and I'm building my deck in a certain way, but I get this awesome potential payoff. And it's really fun every game to get to that point and kind of pull the slot machine, if you will, and see exactly what you're rolling on your 3 legendary invitations, see if they line up for something rather amazing. So I do see the Countess love here. I do not see the Countess hotness, but hey, that's okay too. So next up here, we got another Death Knight card. It's Vampiric Blood. Big number better. Indeed, when it comes to health, I agree. Big number is better. We may have lost Renathal, but by God, we got Vampiric Blood, and I love getting an extra 10 health, 20 health, 30 health when I discover these, 40 health, 50 health. By God, if I can discover even more. That is a delightful way to play Hearthstone for me. I love just that infinite survivability, just, tanking through everything, living forever and grinding out the opponent. I know it's not for everybody, but man, that's absolutely perfect for me. And this being a big payoff power card for triple rune decks makes it really fun, I think, to play triple blood for sure. I also liked this note. Try not to immediately choose Vampiric Blood when discovering a spell as Death Knight challenge. Impossible. Of course, some decks don't want Vampiric Blood at all, but I agree. My instinct's always like, what if I did have 10 extra health? That would be nice. So yeah, this is great. One of my favorite Death Knight cards. Absolutely great with Mograin as well. Let me just burn people down while staying alive forever. That's an absolute dream for me. So next up here is Wildheart Guff, and this is another one that was on the hated list, but also, of course, people love playing Guff, and I get it. I actually also love playing Guff. I like when you play Guff in bad decks, but I don't like when you play Guff in good decks, if you will. When Guff is allowing people to do crazy, obscene druid things in good decks, I think that feels pretty bad. Like, man, that's way too much mana to do all those broken things. But when you give me 20 mana to do something silly and something really fun, that is awesome. That is what I like to see. And that's, to me, the space where Guff is really enjoyable. I'm not sure everybody who wrote Guff is aligned with me. I think some of them were using it for broken stuff, but hey, that's okay too. Somebody wrote, Guff is fun because he allows for combos you otherwise couldn't even dream of. Guff is almost his own format, and duels did him dirty. I really love Damp Druid as an archetype. And I did check. They wrote Damp Druid themselves. That is not my typo. I just copy pasted. I really love Damp Druid as an archetype. Losing early only to become a powerhouse later is super fun, and Guff really enables that. That is a pretty satisfying feeling, like going behind, spending all your mana, ramping, getting up to some crazy mana total, and then just absolutely swinging the game with these bomb cards over and over again. that is really satisfying. So I do understand why that's showing up there. Being able to have 20 mana crystals is simply amazing. I can play tons of combos that weren't possible without having 13, 17, 18 mana in both standard and wild. PS Guff did nothing wrong. He just ramps and draws cards to another level. I think we might have to disagree on that one. I think Guff certainly needed his nerf. So number 9 is Lightforged Cariel. Such a great control tool, someone wrote. The weapon mechanic is new, cool, and flavored. The hero power is so much fun and also gives other paladin archetypes a reason to use this card. And Cariel is really, really hot. Did this list only feature cards you guys think are hot? How many Lieutenant Eddie viewers are here? I can kind of see it. Yeah, going back, I get it, particularly with a Spite Lash Siren. Woo boy. Somebody else wrote, I love making aggro decks feel hopeless. And that is why I like Cariel personally. It feels so good to just dump that Cariel and see people instantly concede because they know basically the game is over at that stage. They can't really beat it. I know that's maybe not the healthiest play pattern. I recognize that. It's probably a good thing she got nerfed to push that back a little bit. But man, that's good to me. I personally love that. I've had plenty of people beat me post Cariel. There's weapon removal if you're really desperate about it, if it becomes too meta. So enabling these greedier paladin decks that can grind people down because of Cariel, that's my play style. So I too see the love for Cariel for sure. This has been one of my favorite hero cards of all the Alterac hero cards that we got. And would definitely be in my top 10 too. So then finally at number 10 here, we have Queen Ashara. I dare not read the comments on this one. Some of you wrote, always good, never broken, several ways to play the card depending on your deck and the matchup. And I do like that. This is a theme I think it showed up a few times here. When cards have like flexibility and have options, that makes the game more fun because you get to play out each game a little bit differently. Just like the Countess, you've got options. Just like test decks lead you down many different paths every single time you play the game. Maybe not Tess herself, but the gameplay she encourages. And same thing with Ashara. And yes, it's in a fixed set of options, but man, some games you're like, they're so close to dying, maybe I will take the weapon and just try to burn them down. Or some games like, man, I absolutely desperately need Gigafin or I'm gonna lose. I'm just gonna play for the high roll Gigafin. Or sometimes it's like, I'm desperate for cards. I just gotta draw 2. I just have to take the shuffle and draw 2. That's just what the game demands right now because I need some crazy answer out of my deck. And all those different ways to play adds up into a really fun card. And yes, she's powerful, but not out of line at all. She's one of those neutral cards that a lot of different decks have played and succeeded with, especially in the Renathal era, but she never to me felt oppressive or crazy powerful. It felt like they had some condition to meet, so sometimes it would be awkward or delayed. And then you also kind of knew what to expect. The Countess can absolutely surprise you and do crazy things. With Ashara, there is a set number of outcomes you can kind of play around and predict. So that added, I think, a nice counterbalance for the opponent to understand what they needed to do. So all in all, awesome iconic character from World of Warcraft. Really fun and flexible card. And I think a really well balanced card too. That is absolutely what you need to make a great loved Hearthstone card. And sure enough, Queen Ashara made the top 10. So there you go, the 10 most loved Hearthstone cards. I gotta say, I see it for almost all of these. I'm not maybe the biggest Spite Lash Siren fan. I don't know if I absolutely love Denathrius always, but for most of these, I think you guys made some great points, and I see why these cards are so loved. I did want to point out one thing here. Thematically, pretty much all of these cards, except maybe Spite Lash Siren, are kind of big late game, often control oriented or just late game threat style cards that aren't OTK, they're not aggro. I think you guys, much like me, love playing a slower brand of Hearthstone, a greedier brand of Hearthstone. That's what makes the game fun for us. Clearly, again, I understand that is a bit of a selection bias problem. My audience is going to agree with me very often because you guys like watching what I do. That's why you're here in the first place. So I'm not necessarily saying that's representative of the entire Hearthstone player base, but it's at least a large chunk of it. We are out there and we like ourselves some slow cards, it seems. So even Vampiric Blood, which is 2 mana, right, is still obviously a very late game, very slow sort of card. Very grindy sort of card. Yeah, you might play it early, but you want to go long if you're playing it. So curious to hear your thoughts on all these love cards. Any omissions you guys think really deserved to be on this list? Want to hear those and more thoughts on Renathal. I'm sure there's going to be a healthy, respectful debate in the comments. Nobody's ever going to get mad or be mean to each other. Not here on YouTube. That's craziness. But thanks so much as always for watching, and until next time, game on.